Your wedding gift to me will be the lake house, my sister declared across the dinner table, not even looking up as she poured herself another glass of wine. You live alone, Chloe. You don't need 6 bedrooms, and honestly, it's ridiculous that you're keeping it all to yourself. My mother didn't hesitate. She clapped her hands in delight, beaming at my sister as if she'd just made the most generous suggestion in the world. My father immediately reached into his pocket for his pen, handing over the property transfer papers they'd brought without my knowledge. They thought I was going to break. They thought they'd finally coerce me into giving away the $6.8 million estate I'd spent 7 grueling years building and restoring. But right before they forced me to sign, the estate attorney cleared his throat and pointed to one single, forgotten clause in the original title deed. Dad read it twice, and his face turned ghostly white. My name is Chloe. At 27, I've learned that the hardest battle you'll ever fight isn't against your enemies. It's against the people who claim to love you. Your wedding gift to me will be the lake house, my sister, Vanessa, declared across the candlelit table. She didn't even bother looking up from her phone as she poured herself another glass of expensive Cabernet. You live alone, Chloe. You don't need 6 bedrooms, and honestly, it's completely ridiculous that you're keeping all that space to yourself. I froze, my fork hovering inches from my plate. I looked across at my parents, waiting for one of them to pull her back to reality, to remind her of how insane that sounded. Instead, my mother clasped her hands together in sheer delight, beaming at Vanessa as if she had just suggested a sweet, innocent game of charades. Oh, it's a brilliant idea. Mom gushed, her eyes sparkling. It would make the absolute perfect wedding location, and then you two could settle down there. Chloe, you've always been so independent. You don't actually need a place like that. Before I could even speak, my father reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a thick stack of folded documents, setting them right beside my water glass alongside a sleek silver pen. They hadn't invited me to dinner to celebrate my sister's engagement. They had set a trap. What my family conveniently forgot was that nobody handed me that lake house. They remembered the breathtaking floor-to-ceiling glass windows, the private dock, and the sprawling stone patio, but they completely erased the sweat and tears it took to build it. 7 years ago, when I was just 20, I found the property in absolute ruins. It was an abandoned, overgrown estate with a rotting roof, flooded foundation, and structural damage that made every contractor run for the hills. My parents literally laughed when I told them my plan. Mom called it a money pit, and Dad told me I was throwing away my savings on a pipe dream. While Vanessa was out spending Dad's money on luxury trips and designer clothes, I was working 80-hour weeks balancing my budding software business and managing contractors. I poured every single penny I made into that house. I spent weekends covered in drywall dust, fixing plumbing late into the night, and renegotiating loans just to keep the project alive. Vanessa, on the other hand, had never worked a hard day in her life. Every time she maxed out a credit card or failed a passion project, Mom and Dad were right there to bail her out. She was the golden child who got rewarded for merely existing, while I was expected to quietly pave my own way. When the market boomed and my restoration turned the property into a $6.8 million masterpiece, their laughter stopped. Suddenly, my money pit became the crown jewel of the family, and in Vanessa's mind, anything that belonged to the family was rightfully hers for the taking. I stared at the thick stack of papers sitting on the tablecloth, the legal jargon on the cover page practically glaring back at me. You can't be serious, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You brought property transfer documents to a family dinner? Chloe, don't be dramatic, Dad said, sliding the silver pen closer to my hand. His voice was firm, carrying that heavy, demanding tone he always used whenever he expected total obedience. Vanessa is getting married in 4 months. She and Mark need a place to start their family, and you are sitting on 6 bedrooms all by yourself. It's practical. Practical? I let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. Dad, I bought that land with my own money. I spent 7 years renovating it. It's worth nearly $7 million. And who gave you the work ethic to make that money? Mom chimed in, leaning across the table, her eyes narrowing with a sharp, manipulative edge. We raised you, Chloe. We provided for you. Now your sister needs this, and you're acting like a selfish, greedy hoarder. Family supports family. That's what we do. It's just a house, Chloe, Vanessa added, casually adjusting her diamond engagement ring. You can easily go buy yourself a small condo in the city. You don't even have a husband or kids. Why do you need a private dock and 6 bedrooms anyway? Before I could process the sheer audacity of her words, a man in a crisp suit walked out from the shadowed hallway of the private dining room. He pulled a stamp and an ink pad from his briefcase. They hadn't just brought papers. They had hired a private notary to sit in the restaurant, fully expecting to intimidate me into signing away my life's work right then and there. Sign the paper, Chloe, Dad commanded, his voice dropping into a dark, quiet threat. Or, as far as this family is concerned, you don't exist anymore. When I stood up, left the pen untouched, and walked out of that restaurant, the nightmare truly began. Within 48 hours, Vanessa launched an absolute scorched earth campaign. She posted crying videos on social media, falsely claiming her wealth-obsessed sister was trying to sabotage her dream wedding and ruin her happiness out of pure jealousy. My phone exploded with endless vile texts from relatives, childhood friends, and family acquaintances calling me a monster. Mom called me 3 times a day just to leave sobbing voicemails, accusing me of breaking her heart and tearing our family apart. They tried to alienate me from everyone I knew, turning my private life into a public spectacle just to crush my spirit. Then came the official legal notice from my father's attorney. It was a formal summons demanding a settlement meeting at his office. Attached was a personal note from Dad. This is your absolute final chance to fix this, Chloe. Sign over the deed at the meeting, or we will cut you out of our lives permanently, initiate a lawsuit, and ensure your name is ruined in this town forever. They genuinely believed the public shame, emotional blackmail, and legal threats would finally force me onto my knees. They thought I was walking into that attorney's office to surrender my life's work. What they didn't realize was that I wasn't going there to wave a white flag. I was bringing my own estate lawyer, alongside every single financial record, property title, and original acquisition document associated with that land. They had built a trap, but I was about to spring one of my own. The air inside the 15th floor law office was thick with tension. My parents and Vanessa sat lined up on one side of the mahogany conference table, looking like a tribunal waiting to pass sentence. Dad was leaning back with his arms crossed, his face set in a cold, victorious scowl. Vanessa was already tapping her manicured nails on a folder, practically bouncing with anticipation, while Mom kept dabbing her eyes with a tissue for dramatic effect. Their high-powered attorney, Marcus, slid a crisp set of binding deed transfer documents across the polished table toward my seat. "Let's keep this simple, Chloe," Marcus said, offering a tight, patronizing smile. "Sign the transfer of the lake property over to your sister today, and your family agrees to drop all pending disputes and public statements. It's time to put this unfortunate unpleasantness behind us." Vanessa smirked, shifting her gaze to me. "It's about time you grew up and did the right thing, Chloe." I didn't reach for the pen. Instead, the heavy oak door opened, and my own estate attorney, David Vance, walked into the room carrying a leather briefcase. David didn't sit down. He calmly placed a thick, ribbon-bound binder on the table right over Marcus's documents, pulled out a pair of reading glasses, and looked around the room with complete composure. "We aren't here to surrender anything, Marcus," David said smoothly, opening the binder to reveal the original land registry, corporate filings, and purchase deeds. "We are here because my client wants to make sure everyone in this room understands exactly what happens the moment you try to touch this property." David flipped through the heavy binder, his finger stopping at a single highlighted line in the original land title and corporate trust framework. "You see," David began, his voice echoing in the silent room, "Chloe never purchased this property as a private individual. The lake house is owned under a protected corporate entity, linked to a rider clause established during the land's initial acquisition 7 years ago." Marcus frowned, leaning forward to inspect the document. "A corporate rider? That doesn't invalidate a standard transfer if—" "Read line 42, Marcus," David interrupted calmly. Marcus pulled the paper closer. As his eyes scanned the text, his patronizing demeanor completely evaporated. His mouth opened slightly, and the color drained from his face. "What is it, Marcus?" Dad demanded, his voice suddenly losing its booming authority. "What does it say?" David answered for him, looking directly at my father. "It says that 7 years ago, when you tried to sabotage Chloe's purchase by secretly placing a conditional lien on the adjoining access road through your family business, you signed a cross-collateralization agreement. To keep your business solvent, you tied your company's commercial debt to this land's title, under Vanessa's name as a co-signatory to hide it from tax audits." Vanessa gasped, looking wildly between Dad and the lawyer. "Wait, what?" "It means," David continued, his voice sharp as a razor, "that the moment this lake house changes ownership out of Chloe's corporate trust, it triggers an instant acceleration clause. Every single cent of the $2.4 million in concealed business debt your father accumulated under Vanessa's name becomes due immediately. You aren't inheriting a $7 million luxury estate, Vanessa. You're inheriting immediate personal bankruptcy." My father slumped back in his chair, his face ghostly white, completely exposed. The room went completely still, save for the sound of my mother's ragged intake of breath. Vanessa turned on my father, her face twisted in utter shock and betrayal. "You put $2 million of debt in my name?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. The fairy tale wedding, the lavish life, the 6-bedroom waterfront dream, it all vanished in a single second, replaced by the cold reality of her father's secret financial ruin. Dad couldn't even look her in the eye. He sat staring at the table, completely broken, his decades of arrogance and manipulation unraveling in front of the very attorneys he had brought to crush me. Marcus quietly closed his briefcase, stepped away from the table, and informed my parents that his firm could no longer represent them given the conflict of interest and potential fraud. I stood up, smoothed down my blazer, and looked at my family one last time. They had spent years treating me like a bank account to exploit, assuming my silence and hard work made me weak. They never realized that the same independence they mocked was what allowed me to protect myself. "My estate remains in my trust," I said quietly, looking directly at Vanessa. "And as for the wedding, I suggest you look for a cheaper venue." I walked out of that skyscraper into the crisp afternoon air, leaving behind the drama, the toxicity, and the people who only loved me when they thought they could take from me. I kept my lake house, my peace, and my freedom, and for the first time in my life, I knew nobody would ever try to steal my story again.